There are some people whose genius doesn't just change the world, it leaves this permanent mark, right? A legacy that's both, celebrated and deeply, deeply feared. Well, that's the real story of J. Robert Oppenheimer.
I mean, what a chilling thing to say, right? Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds. These words have really come to define this moment of terrifying creation. And you got to understand, he said this himself, not in triumph, but with a sense of awe, and maybe even real terror at what he had just done.
So the big question is, how did one man's genius even lead to a moment like that? That's really the heart of his story, isn't it? So we're going to trace that path, from this incredibly brilliant young mind all the way to becoming the director of the project that built the atomic bomb. And we'll see what happened when his creation was finally used.
Okay, let's jump right into the climax of his work, the Trinity test. This was the first ever test of a nuclear weapon. Picture it, July 16th, 1945, out in the middle of the New Mexico desert. This is the day the world, well, it changed forever.
The level of uncertainty going into this test was just immense. I mean, some scientists had this terrifying tiny fear that the chain reaction could literally set the entire atmosphere on fire. So look at the difference between what they thought would happen and what actually happened. It's staggering. Oppenheimer's team, they were expecting a yield of maybe 0.3 kilotons. The actual blast, it was up to 50 times more powerful. The heat was so insane it just evaporated the steel tower holding the bomb. And the shockwave, people felt it 160 kilometers away. Just incredible.
So where did that famous destroyer of worlds quote actually come from? Well, it wasn't just him being dramatic. Oppenheimer was a serious scholar. He studied Sanskrit. And for him, the Bhagavad Gita was one of the most important books he'd ever read. So in that moment of just mind-blowing destruction, his brain went straight to ancient philosophy. Pretty amazing, right?
Okay, so to really understand the kind of man who quotes ancient Hindu scripture at a nuclear bomb test, we've got to go back. Let's rewind to his early life and see exactly how this incredible mind was formed.
We throw the word genius around a lot these days, but for Oppenheimer, it absolutely fit. I mean, get this. At just 12 years old, he was invited to give a lecture to the New York Mineralogical Club. He then just blows through Harvard in only 3 years and has his PhD in physics by the time he's 23. It wasn't just a fast rise, it was completely meteoric.
But here's the thing. For all that brilliance, his incredible intellect was matched by this really deep internal struggle. It's like there were two sides to him. On the one hand, a total polymath. He mastered physics, chemistry, literature, even Eastern religion. But on the other hand, here was a guy who battled severe depression and had what his friends called really self-destructive tendencies. He was a chain smoker, too. This profound and honestly often painful complexity, that's what really defined him.
And this quote, which he actually said to his own brother, really tells you everything you need to know about his focus. I need physics more than friends. For Oppenheimer, his work, that was his entire world. And it often came at the expense of everything and everyone else.
All right, so how does this super focused, brilliant, and let's face it, really complicated guy end up at the very center of the biggest, most secret military project of World War II? Let's get into it.
So you have to remember what was happening in the world. The rise of Hitler in Germany forced this unbelievable brain drain. So many of Europe's greatest scientific minds, many of whom were Jewish, had to flee for their lives. And they came to the United States. I mean, look at this list. Einstein, Szilard, von Neumann. It's a who's who of 20th century physics. And their arrival in America? Well, that was about to change absolutely everything. And what's so crucial to understand is that the entire American atomic bomb project was born out of one thing: fear. Pure and simple. Fear that the Nazis would build one first. It was a letter from Albert Einstein and Leo Szilard that was the spark. They wrote to President Roosevelt, basically begging him to take the threat of German nuclear research seriously.
And when America committed, they went all in. The Manhattan Project cost $2.2 billion back then. In today's money, that's about $24 billion. This was not some little research project. This was a massive, all-hands-on-deck national undertaking.
So this right here was the central scientific puzzle that Oppenheimer was hired to solve. Basically, to make a bomb, you need a nuclear chain reaction. And to get that chain reaction going, you need what's called a critical mass of radioactive stuff like uranium or plutonium. Oppenheimer's whole job was to figure out, okay, how much do we need and how in the world do we make it happen? So,
the project didn't just put all its eggs in one basket. They ended up going down two different paths to create a weapon. And this led to two totally different types of atomic bombs, which we now know by their infamous nicknames, Little Boy and Fat Man. And these two designs were fundamentally different. Little Boy, the one used on Hiroshima, was fueled by uranium-235. It used a pretty simple gun-type design. Basically, it shot one piece of uranium into another one to start the reaction. Fat Man, on the other hand, the one used on Nagasaki, was fueled by plutonium, and it needed a much, much more complex and powerful design, something they called the implosion type.
So this implosion idea, it was totally revolutionary and completely unproven. The concept was wild. You take a sphere of plutonium that's not quite at critical mass, and you surround it with perfectly shaped conventional explosives. Then, you detonate all those explosives at the exact same instant. The shockwave crushes the plutonium sphere inward, it implodes, squeezing it so tightly that it reaches critical mass and boom. This was the incredibly complicated design they were betting everything on at the Trinity test.
So the science worked. It was a success, but that success, it came at an absolutely devastating human cost. And it threw Oppenheimer into this deep moral crisis that would honestly haunt him for the rest of his days.
And everything just happened so fast. August 6th, Hiroshima. Just 3 days later, Nagasaki. And then only about a week after that, Oppenheimer himself, the father of the atomic bomb, is in Washington, demanding that nuclear weapons be banned. His moment of triumph, it turned to regret almost overnight.
When he finally met with President Harry Truman a few months later, this is what he said. "Mr. President, I feel I have blood on my hands." Just a raw, powerful confession of his guilt. Truman, well, he was not impressed. He was furious and reportedly told his staff he never wanted to see that crybaby scientist ever again.
And that really marked a complete 180 for him. The man who built the first atomic bomb spent the rest of his life fighting to control it. He campaigned hard against the nuclear arms race, and he fiercely opposed developing the even more powerful hydrogen bomb. Of course, this new attitude put him on a collision course with some very powerful people in Washington, and it all ended with this controversial hearing where he was stripped of his security clearance. It was a huge public humiliation for a man who had been celebrated as a national hero.
So, it all brings us back to that central question, doesn't it? Was he a hero? Did his work end a truly brutal war? Or was he a villain who opened Pandora's box and let loose the most destructive force we've ever known? There's just no easy answer to be found in his story.
And this is the reality of his legacy. The number 9. Today, 9 countries have nuclear weapons. The very technology Oppenheimer helped create has now spread all over the world. It makes the questions his life raises more urgent today than they've ever been. It's the world we all live in now, a world living in the shadow cast by that very first fiery explosion out in the New Mexico desert.